Hi guys, welcome back. In this episode I'm going to attempt to fit these brakes onto my 520D f11. So let me show you these brakes here. So this is an f10 M5 setup paired with X5M, X6M brackets. So these are off of f85, f86, X5M, X6M, and everything else is from an f10 M5. The X5M and X6M will essentially have the same calipers, so I think you can use them. But I believe the discs are slightly different with a slightly different center bore, and I think the pads may also be different because the pad height might be different, but I'm not sure. So do your research. In this particular episode, I'm using f10 M5 discs, f10 M5 pads, f10 M5 hoses, f10 M5 calipers, and X5M, X6M brackets. I've also got a selection of M12 washers here, which I will need to use potentially in order to make sure that everything is centered correctly. So in order to make sure that the caliper is centered correctly across the disc, and in order that the caliper height in relation to the disc is also correct. So let's see how we go. I haven't done this before, but theoretically all of this should work. I've done a little bit of research before this, so let's see. This is my 520D with bottle top brakes that are on it at the moment. I think 330mm, which are nowhere near good enough for the size of the car what this is. They're okay for daily use and the fact that it's only a 520D, but those are bigger and better, and in this case bigger is better. So let's see how we get on. So this is the first trial fit, and everything looks to be okay. The disc is spinning and the caliper height seems to be all right. Nothing's tightened or torqued, but let's have a look at the center point. So we've got the pad tabs very close to the front face of the disc, and how we're looking on the other side, there's quite a bit more gap there. So I think what needs to happen, the caliper needs to come out, I'd say by about 2mm, and then we should essentially be able to bolt it down. So even though there is no interference, the caliper is still not center over the disc. So what we need to do is we just got to move the caliper out this way ever so slightly to make sure it's dead center across the disc. Okay, so in order to move this caliper out a little bit, I'm going to try and use this 2mm washer on both the caliper bracket tabs, and then that will bring it out ever so slightly, and hopefully this will be enough to keep it dead center, and then we'll look at the alignment in this direction. So let's have a look what we've got. Now I'm a lot more happier with the alignment of the caliper across the disc, and I think this is dead on. So about 2.5 millimeter washer will be perfect. So the gap here and the gap to the tabs on the other side is more or less equal. The only thing left to do is to actually check the pad alignment in this direction. So as you can see here, the disc is really quite close to the caliper, and if we get the pad to contact the disc, you can just about see here that the caliper is sitting a little bit too low. So what I'd like to do is to now move the caliper slightly further away to make sure that the edge of the pad is in line with the edge of the disc. So I'd say that's probably about another 2.5 millimeters. So another couple of those washers, M12s, on the mounting tabs just underneath here, and we should be okay. The bottom of the pad is actually perfectly flush with the disc, but it's supposed to sit all the way out to the edge of the disc. Otherwise, if you leave this gap here, unswept area, there's going to be a substantial lip forming on the disc as you keep using the brakes, and that's not ideal. So I'm going to use a pair of these for now. I think that's about 3 millimeters because these are about 1.5s, just for the purposes of aligning everything to see where we are. The tricky bit is these are monoblock calipers, so you've got to put the pads into the caliper before you can install them, which makes the whole assembly really quite heavy. And then you've got to hang these washers off of these bolts and then try not to drop everything as you're installing it. There we are. Let's see. Now with the caliper spaced, you can see we've gained a little bit of gap here, which is great, and the pad alignment looks spot on. That's absolutely perfect. There's a little bit of a gap here, which is completely normal, and there's a tiny little bit of a gap just here, which is also completely normal. So this is the setup. It took about 2.5 millimeters to come out this way, and it took about 3 millimeters to come out that way. So very fractional adjustment needed to get everything to line up properly, but this is where we are. However, something tells me that my wheels are not going to fit over these brakes. I don't have the M specific retaining screws, so I've just used these which I had lying around for the time being to get me by. I'll take this one off in a minute and try and test fit the wheel, but the caliper is so much larger, and because it's got outer pistons, it protrudes a hell of a lot more past the actual face of the hub. I don't actually think it will be okay with my wheels because I don't think the wheels have enough spoke clearance. So potentially I might have a problem here, and I may have a problem in terms of the diameter, but let's see. Before we crack open the hydraulic system and replace the lines, let's see where the wheel fits. Nope, it doesn't fit. Let's try a 12mm spacer, see how we get on. And that's still a no. So problem lies in the barrel. The actual caliper is touching the inner face of the barrel. You can just about see it here. It looks fantastic, but sadly it's not going to work with these wheels. So the problem isn't really the spacers. I've put the spacers in the hope that it's going to bring the wheel far out enough to where the barrel of the wheel is flat, and that's not going to interfere with the caliper. But even where the barrel is flat, it's still not big enough to support such a large braking setup. So now I'm left with one of the two options really. One is replace the wheels, so either go for 20-inch or go for something that has larger barrels. So I know, for example, 641M wheels, which I have on my E90, they are actually made to clear 400mm brakes, exactly the same as these, the carbon ceramic package on the M2, M3, M4 chassis. So they would work, and the offsets are fairly good, and the only concern is the load rating of the wheel, so I may perhaps use them if I choose to go ahead with this setup. Or I could go for 20s, OEM 20-inch wheels that you could find on the 6 Series or the 5 Series GT, or on the 7 Series f01. Or option 2 is potentially go for a smaller brake setup and slightly downsize in terms of the disc and caliper setup. So I'm going to have to make a decision on that at a later point. So I've just gone inside to have a little drink and come back outside to this. And this is one of the perks of living in England. So there you go. I've managed to assemble the car back together with the original discs and calipers, and I've just bolted everything back up and bolted the wheels back on, since we aren't going to be able to fully install this kit today. And I've taken this off and managed to get it inside just before everything got soaking wet. But wonderful sunshine and pouring rain. So anyway, that's that. Moving on to what's been learnt from this exercise is, if you are fitting a set of these and you're using a set of X5M, X6M, F8X caliper brackets with the M5 setup, what you need is a set of these washers. So I'd recommend using 1, 2, 3, 4 on each side. So 8 washers of 2.5mm M12 by 2.5, even 3mm thick, with an OD of around about, I think about 20mm, 22mm OD. And you could use these on here as well as on here. You could use slightly larger OD washers, or you could have a set of little spacers machined, or alternatively you could have a set of different brackets machined with additional 2.5mm on these tabs and with additional 2.5mm on these tabs. But I think using M12 steel washers is just as good and is going to do the job as long as everything is torqued to spec. You could use existing bolts to secure the caliper to the car, the caliper bracket to the car, and you could use the original bolts to secure the caliper to the bracket, because there's plenty of thread engagement and you're not compromising the bolted joint if you're only adding 2 to 3mm worth of spacing to either one of the fixings. You'll also need a fitting kit, so the springs for the caliper pads and the pins for the pads to hold them in the caliper, and you will also need one on each side of these retaining bolts. So this is what I used for illustration purposes only and just to hold the disc in place, but you will need M-specific retaining screws, which you could buy from the main dealer. They're not the same as the non-M cars, so make sure you get one of them. They're not essential, but they make life easier when doing maintenance and when installing stuff. So when the disc is actually on the hub and the wheel is bolted over the disc. The clamp will hold the disc to the hub, and you have 5 wheel bolts which will hold it in place and it's not going to slip. But this is essential for assembly purposes only, and I don't think it really plays any structurally critical role. So there you go. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I have definitely learned a few things, and having a little bit of time to think about what I'm going to do, I have more or less decided that I will go for a smaller brake setup on the car. I will run 370s on the front off of the G series, 374s rather, just because they will clear these wheels, and I don't really want to use any spacing on the front because I think these wheels sit fairly well without any spacing. I am using a spacer on the back, but not on the front, and I don't really want to change these wheels. The car is in daily use and it's fairly comfortable on the 19s. I don't want to go to 20s, and as much as I love these brakes, they're really nice and I think they would look fantastic on the car, I just don't think it's worth the headache to run them on a daily driver. But if you have large clearance wheels, if you have 20-inch wheels and you're running big power, you have a 535i or you have a 540i or whatever it is, and you fancy installing a set of these brakes, at least now you know what's needed. And if you can source the parts, it's really nice OEM plus bolt-on kit which you can get. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching as always, and see you again in the next one.